infrastructure is essentially the same thing as low impact development. With regards to the EPA, we use the term synonymously. LID, the concept of LID has been around for years and years. Green infrastructure is our marketing tool, the way we repackaged it in the NPDES program, and so we use the term synonymously. The only difference that we implemented with green infrastructure in the NPDES program was it not only having a site-specific impact, but also taking that a little bit wider to a neighborhood, a community, and potentially all the way out to a watershed. So, which is why I name it green infrastructure versus LID, but there is the same thing. So I suspect that if you're here, you have a good concept of what green infrastructure LID is, but in case you don't, green infrastructure is essentially going back to what we used to do prior to all the new development, prior to all the concrete and the impervious surfaces. So it's essential natural systems or engineered systems that use the soil and or the vegetation to treat a certain volume of water at a certain given time. It does that through infiltration, evaporation, transpiration, but it also captures and reuses the water, ideally on the site that it was generated at. So it has a number of benefits, those specific to water quality and beyond that. And so what I'd like to do is, typically in the past when I've done these presentations, we've gone through and given you, hydrology, why green infrastructure is important, the volume of water that's created because of development and imperviousness. But I think you're going to get a good feel for that from the additional presenters that are here. And so I kind of wanted to give you an idea of how this particular program has evolved for EPA. And so that's what I plan to do. So we initiated the program in approximately 2007, got together with several partners, approximately 5 partners, and began developing this strategic agenda for how we were going to be promoting green infrastructure as our program. And so the primary focus of that was specific to stormwater management, to protect water quality as well as additional water resources and ecosystem. But that's evolved over the years, and so we developed a strategic agenda, the first one that came out in 2008. It gave us an idea of those actions that EPA was going to be pursuing to promote its use. We've issued a series of policy memos that encourage the use of green infrastructure for regulatory requirements, as well as additional strategic agendas. But what's been happening since then, so the first agenda was like I said, released in 2008. Shortly thereafter, approximately June of 2009, EPA, HUD, and DOT partnered and signed this Partnership of Sustainable Communities and committed to these 6 livability principles, very similar to what the chairman was referring to. We wanted to come together to leverage our resources and our expertise in providing more walkable, more sustainable, more areas that provided more gathering space, whether that be multimedia use, multi-development, whether that be transit-oriented development with transportation, and a large number of sustainability efforts. And so that scope of green infrastructure was expanded not just from a water quality standpoint, but also to a socioeconomic and overall sustainability. So we incorporated that into our further agenda, always still maintaining the sustainability portion of the water quality aspects. Then shortly thereafter, more recently, in 2013, the President announced his Climate Action Plan. Am I still there? Yeah. The President announced his Climate Action Plan. In response to that, green infrastructure has been expanded slightly more in that sense because of its additional means to protect not just water quality resources, but also overall natural resource conservation, and the ability for it to help with climate resiliency, the ability for it to help with disaster recovery, some of the things that we've seen in some of the hurricane issues, as well as just overall climate impact. So what we begin to do is incorporate green infrastructure not just as water, not just as an EPA, but also on a larger scope for other agencies as well. And that's where we are now is, and as you can see here, in October of 2013, we released our newest strategic agenda. And what this does, it maintains the concept of of green infrastructure for stormwater management, but it also, in doing so by engaging local communities through partnerships and technical assistance programs. But it also adds this larger component of implementing green infrastructure as a business as usual across all levels of government, as well as EPA, not just in the water program and not just in the stormwater program, but in all our divisions, because of the sustainability aspect of it. Its ability to help with energy efficiency and reducing pump capacities for, whether it's the New Orleans area that's trying to move a large volume of flood water, whether it's this area we're trying to conserve public drinking water sources and not having to pump more water from our water resource, but collecting more water, conserving more water by capturing it and using it locally. So a large concept, a large area of sustainability for green infrastructure that's been expanded. And so how this agenda as well was also slightly different. So it was a cross multi effort for EPA, not just a water effort when we developed this particular agenda. So it has 5 focus areas. It has the federal coordination aspect, the clean water regulatory aspect, because that's important to us obviously, some research and information, funding and financing, as well as this partnership and capacity building. So as you can see here, there's a number of programs that we're working with, not only to finance green infrastructure, but also to promote it and implement into their normal everyday practices. We've got the National Estuary Program, which assesses climate change vulnerabilities. We have the Urban Waters Program, which is also an EPA program to help urban waters areas and also help in the promotion of local waters and getting people to those waters and that livability aspect there. And we have the Smart Growth Program that is now under our Office of Sustainable Communities, and they've done a number in the past and currently a number of technical assistance type programs for the implementation of green infrastructure. And we also work with the U.S. Forest Service in the use of trees for various livability and stormwater benefits. But we've also begun to develop these large-scale programs to complement resiliency and disaster recovery, as I've mentioned. Some of our what we know is, as far as LID and green infrastructure, it's a lot more progressive in the Northeast areas for various reasons. It was essentially developed in that area. And so what they've seen is, with a lot of the disasters that they've had, the request for assistance from EPA, not just for green infrastructure, but to help them because it's sustainable, their practices that can be, that essentially won't have to continuously be revamped. So you've got water systems, we've got additional development. We can essentially, if we conserve water, if we utilize all the benefits of the green infrastructure, we don't have to continue to expand infrastructure and various other practices. So we work with FEMA. We've been working with FEMA on that as well. We do some our green infrastructure technical assistance, which also more recently has had a component of a resiliency. And then I wanted to give you an example of some of the federal coordination that we've already been working with through the Smart Growth Program. And we've been doing this in our region for a few years. The building blocks for sustainable communities is one that all 3 of these programs are all technical assistance essential grants, where you're required to submit a letter of interest and then selected. But the types of technical assistance you can get is development of green or complete streets, whether that's whether that's the initial portion and then assistance with implementation, land use strategies for protection of water quality. That's where our water quality scorecard came from, as well as just sustainable land use code audits that will help with various things, whether that be walkability, whether that is some of this economic development that was referred to. And also the Green America's Capitals has been a great one for us that came out of the Smart Growth Program. And that was for specific to capitals to help them develop implementable visions of environmental friendly neighborhoods and to incorporate green infrastructure in that application. And in our region, we've been pretty successful with one of the first ones that was done in Little Rock, Arkansas, and we've seen a lot of economic development occur from that, as well as a lot of implementation of green infrastructure because of its ability to make more walkable and more friendly places for people to gather and spend the money that some of you all want to be spent. But then also the Smart Growth Implementation Plan. The Smart Growth Implementation Plan was one that all these were based on, and this one's usually not geared specifically to green infrastructure, but because of its ability where they review codes, some school siting, and some other policies that we're able to implement green infrastructure in. Then I know I was able to work with Las Cruces on one that they did in '09, I believe, and in doing so we were able to give them a lot of good information with regards to green streets and how in some of these areas they were concerned with flooding, and how green infrastructure may play a significant role in that. So these are some of the different potential funding opportunities that you may be subject to or may have the ability to. And then obviously with the clean water regulatory aspect of it, we're seeing more and more since some of our policy memos and a lot of these types of conferences that more and more MS4 permits, whether those be specific to states doing them, EPA putting them in there, but they're incorporating more and more green infrastructure type of provisions and requirements for MS4s. And oftentimes those, even in those states that aren't pushing them in the specific MS4 language, communities themselves, MS4 permittees, are in their stormwater management plans selecting green infrastructure because they see the benefits for resources and ability to comply with several other requirements. And so now in this case, now it's being more considered as part of a CSO or combined sewer system consent decree. In this area we don't have combined sewers, but it is something that we're looking to in the case of additional assistance with sanitary sewer overflow types of enforcement and orders, is the ability to implement green infrastructure where it's applicable. We also have been working on the research and information exchange. We work a lot with our Office of Research Development that works essentially more nationally. As I mentioned, the majority of this practice began in the Northeast, so a lot of that research is being done in the Northeast as well, as because that's where our Office of Research and Development is essentially located. But they have done a few things in our area, and we consistently are knocking at their door and pushing that they begin to do more research in the climate areas of our region. You know, we have a very diverse Houston, Louisiana, high volume rainwater, as well as our semi-arid and arid climates in all the way through New Mexico. So we understand that there's various different applications to green infrastructure. One practice is not going to work exactly the same in this area that it works somewhere else. And so we want to make sure that we get more and more research and more ability to assist the communities in identifying what works best for their area, and as well as not just what works best, but what their main goal and interest is. And then obviously we have a number of we've been having a number of webinars. We have websites that we've developed. We've got modeling tools. Most recently, we released the National Stormwater Calculator. We've had the Water Quality Scorecard. But with our partners, we've also released others with Center for Watershed Protection, with the Low Impact Development Center, some of the others, several tools that we've collaborated on with them. With regards to funding and financing, there are a number of ways that we've been working to leverage some of these funding, specifically in the beginning areas where we were trying to promote it more. It was not as widely known in this area, and we were trying to encourage the use, make it, and so what the SRFs, the state revolving funds, primarily in the clean water state revolving fund, but also in the drinking water, there's opportunities for funding to implement these practices. In 2009, with the ERA funds, there was specific language that required the states the EPA provides funding to the states, and the states essentially decide how this funding is is divvied through the project that request that they receive, but they had a green project reserve, and they were required to a portion of the funding that they received from the EPA to use for implementation of green infrastructure, energy efficiency, some other sustainable practices. And then 319, which is a non-point source program, also offers the ability to more of a demonstration education outreach type of funding ability that also we provide funding for the state. The state then decides whether they're going to fund it and gets input from EPA. Our urban waters program also is largely based on implementation of green infrastructure in those areas, and as well as brownfields. In a lot of cases, brownfields revitalization. I know some of this area has implemented revitalization and the use of green infrastructure, as well as for just stormwater management. Some of the more recent ones that I've seen are community type of gardening in a brownfield site that, for whatever reason, how they developed it was able to do that. And then we've also are trying to reduce costs of green infrastructure. Some of the studies that we're trying to come up with, this one's one of Region 3. We're trying to push that a little bit more here in our region as well, trying to get some studies and incorporate some of the public-private partnerships that we can incorporate here to be able to get these studies in and provide that information that there is a cost benefit. It may not be all up front, it may be more long-term, and it may be in the socioeconomic aspect of it. But there are certainly cost reduction and benefits to implementation of green infrastructure. And then finally, one of the last focus areas of our more recent agenda is just direct technical assistance. So the last couple of years, one of the ways that we've done this is with the Office of Water Green Infrastructure Technical Assistance programs, which we modeled a lot. We modeled it based on what the Sustainable Communities and the Smart Growth programs were doing. So what we've done with some of those since 2012 is the projects that have been selected and have been from, let's see, I've got them listed here, from reviewing of codes and ordinances, as well as some cost-benefit analysis and development of designs. And I know I was able to work with the City of Dallas, received a technical assistance grant, I believe last year. I believe it was one of the first ones in 2012. And what theirs is in their code review, because Dallas had 3 different plans, one from a transportation aspect, one from the stormwater management aspect, and one from economic development, green building, and they were all done by different groups with different scopes, but they were supposed to meld together to be able to encourage more sustainable green infrastructure. And what they found is that because they were done so separately with different focuses and not with a combined focus, or they thought with a combined focus, but it turned out that it wasn't, was that they actually created impediments. And so although a developer or a community was wanting to implement this particular practice, whether it was green streets, and maybe the transportation allowed it, but on the stormwater management aspect of it, it wasn't allowed. And it was as a play of terminology and how to move that. And one of the biggest aspects of it was we had a workshop. It was a consultant. We had Tetra Tech do the full review, and then we participated. But what we found at that was that when the green building group, when they did theirs, they assumed that the site stormwater aspect, the site water conservation, all that was going to be handled by the green infrastructure stormwater group. But the stormwater group assumed, because it was specific to the site, that the green building group was going to do it. And so there was a lot of issues there. And so that was one of the big pushes that we wanted to do as an agency, is identify that even these larger cities that are trying to align their codes and ordinances in a way that they're able to utilize this, have to understand that they've got to come together and work together to see, will this particular fire lane, is it possible to reduce this? Is it possible to reduce the street in this area? If not in this area, maybe over here, and we can manage the water here versus some other issues. So that was very interesting. And we've had a number of partners in the past. We initially each region identified one partner, we had identified Austin at the time because they were up and coming. They were doing green infrastructure well before we even began the initiative. And so we identified them, and then since that time with these technical assistance grants. And so we had a summit in 2013 in Syracuse, and what they did there was about 27 communities that gathered to explain the experiences they've had in implementing green infrastructure. And what came out of it is, and what's to come is, they identified a number of BMPs that they're trying to compile to be able to release in their report that can assist other communities in lessons learned, or how they did certain things and what they had to do to be able to do so. And then just in general, raising awareness among engineers, design professionals, very similar to these, partnering with you all, coming to speak to you all on these projects, realizing that you all are the ones that are implementing this, that you have the day-to-day engineering and site experience, and learning from you all as well as we are trying to educate to be able to continue with the scope of implementing green infrastructure. And I think that's it, unless you all have any questions. I gave you my contact information. I saw quite a bit of examples that might be of green infrastructure implementation in this area, and what we're doing for the region is we'd certainly like to highlight that on a more national scope. And so we have a very basic green infrastructure site now in our region, and what we're hoping to do is get a lot of examples of green infrastructure in all aspects, whether they be site specific to university, to city, to watershed, to be able to link more and more people to more and more communities together. Maybe this small town over here or this large town here is thinking about it, but they're not certain about how it's worked, what it's done here. Has it been beneficial? Have you monitored? Have you thought about monitoring? All these different questions they may have, and oftentimes they don't like calling EPA, but they might go to you. And so that peer-to-peer information exchange is something that we certainly want to be able to at least convene by through at least the website. And obviously we want to know what's going out there as well. All right.
Anybody have any questions? We got time for maybe one or two questions. Questions for Susanna?
You mentioned the transportation plan and stormwater plan kind of in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still a work in progress? And do you see them kind of converging?
It is.
Some agreement on how green streets, for instance, would work?
Right, it is. It is still a work in progress because they did get one of the things about these technical assistants is not only do you get these workshops and the assistance in reviewing of what the scope of that particular project is, but you get a final report, kind of, this is what we found, this is what we recommend with what you're trying to do. So they got that. Obviously there's always politics in there, and so fortunately is that in the DFW area they had an LID design competition not 2 or 3 months just before the actual workshop, and the city manager that wasn't for but wasn't against LID green infrastructure was present because staff kept pushing and they had her be an expert judge and all those things, or be a jury judge, and it was just phenomenal. They were worried that that particular one didn't start till like 6 and ended like at 10. And they were so worried that, oh no, we've got her here and it's so late, and she stayed just and talked. They couldn't get her out of there because she was so realized how beneficial it would be for the community, and so that helped her push. That helped that project, and they're still working on that. So it's been really exciting to see that it's getting, at least that stormwater group is getting more and more assistance in implementation and being able to push that forward.
Mm-hmm. Susanna, the disaster relief component, is that more in the recovery mode or the redevelopment mode?
A little bit of both, and so we're still developing that aspect of it. That's something that one of the reasons why here recently, or pretty soon, we'll get a new announcement of the building blocks technical assistance, and it'll be a component, one of the potential opportunities for that program. But also, I believe in the green infrastructure one, I believe we had that as well, or if not, we will be shortly. And so that's something that's new and developing, and they're trying obviously to catch that on the forefront, and ideally having things implemented that will help with recovery after an incident, but also in the aspect of building, because that's essentially how it all began. Some of the tornadoes that happened up in the Middle East, and the fact that it just so happened that the girl that was working at this smart growth office originated in the stormwater. So Abby Hall, who had done a lot of the manuals at the beginning, and she's now housed in smart growth, and so that's still her passion, and that's essentially how we really linked in, and they realized that her benefit to expanding that.